everyone, welcome to the TriEssence martial art channel. Another episode of Style Deconstructed, where we take styles apart to a better understanding on what its purpose, design, and meaning is all about. Now, due to the fact that recently I've been talking about the legitimacy or the lack thereof of fast yang style, today I'm going to talk about the actual application of single word. Now, before I do this, I'd like to clarify that up to this point in time, we can no longer determine the original authentic use of single word, mainly because the combat knowledge of Yang style Taichi has somewhat been lost ever since Yang Shaohou, the third generation Yang family member that actually do know how to fight, killed himself at age 67 and did not have an actual heir to his martial arts skills. Yang Zhengfu, on the other hand, didn't live for much longer after him, also died due to health issues. He is actually not very known for his combat ability, and due to this collection of events, the knowledge of how Yang style Taichi should be applied in combat is most likely lost and can never really be rediscovered. So all that we are left with are possibilities, or basically hypotheses that everyone else try to reverse engineer based on what we see in the movement to what we understand of combat. And in doing so, no one can definitely say that whatever their understanding of the application is the correct one. However, we can make educated guesses, and we can basically deduce and exclude things that are far-fetched and impractical, and then determine which one is more likely to be the original applicational purpose. And as always in this channel, if you've been here for a while, you should already know that we will be using two main tools to evaluate whether a certain explanation of an application is correct or not. The first thing we're using the tool of Occam's razor. So what that means is anything that's too complicated is unlikely to be executed in combat and probably is not the original purpose. So the original application of any internal martial art styles movement should be quite straightforward and to the point. And that's Occam's razor. Secondly, we're going to be using the concept of the master key. So what that means is we don't want a specific solution to a specific problem. So, for example, if this technique's application only work in this very niche condition, that's probably not true, and probably just being reinvented by some other guy who has no real combat experience, because it's very unlikely that a style used for combat will have very niche technique, especially in this case of a single word that has been repeated many times throughout the form, but only serve a very specific niche situation. Right? These techniques should be able to be generalized and applied to a broader range of situations. So that's the concept of master key. So with these two concepts in mind, let's look at single word. So I have to say, single word is one of these Taichi techniques that has always interested me because it looks severely weird, right? I mean, don't you think so? Like a move that looks like this. And the funny thing, this is one of the key essential moves, right? Find in all versions of Taichi, and it repeat a lot of times, at least like 6 times if I'm counting correctly. In any regular form, sometimes even repeated more. So you can definitely know this is an important move, but it looks really weird from a practical perspective. Now, to better understand this, we're going to have to look at where this move comes from. Originally, the earliest record of this move actually comes from the General Qi Guang, right? The Ming Dynasty General Qi Guang's 32 posture Changquan, which is a form that he invented to train his military to prepare them for weapon combat. So in there's actually a move you can see here, which comes from the manuscript, with a move which looks something actually like this. Okay, so it actually doesn't look like the modern Taichi version of single word, and there's a description. So there are different interpretations to what that posture in Qi Guang's manuscript are referring to. And again, it's one of those things where you can never really get to the bottom of it because he's dead, and he doesn't have a direct line of unbroken lineage. So it's still up to debate. But one of the more prominent explanation to the move is that you basically start here, and then you go out like this. And this move you can also see in other styles, there are Shaolin styles, there are other external styles like Pao Trui, I believe, which have similar moves to this. So you can kind of believe how all of them took influence from General Qi Zhiguang's Quanjing manuscript. And what this move is used for is basically when he does a kick, I'm going to catch like this, and then come in and then push him off balance. And that actually makes a lot of sense on why the hand would be hooked that way, and and why this hand is pushing forward. So essentially, it is a stroke. There's another alternative explanation to Qi Zhiguang's manuscript where they say it's just a hit like this, which can also somewhat make sense, especially considering in the Ming Dynasty, first-to-first hand-to-hand combat is still kind of primitive and largely are just movements that are taken from weapons without the weapon. So if you imagine having sword, it kind of makes sense to have like broad cuts. So it kind of somewhat believable that they would derive to the hand style, but also would just hit someone with a back foot and then chop somebody with a palm. Although I do lean personally more toward the first explanation because I don't know, it's just more elegant, and it also perfectly explains why there's a weird hook and the hook is pointing backwards rather than forward. This awkward kind of posture, it better explains what is useful. However, even if this is the original purpose of single word, it is actually definitely not the purpose when it comes to Taichi. Even though Taichi most likely are derived from the 32 portion of General Qi Zhiguang's first manuscript, throughout generations, it definitely has a lot of changes and evolutions of its own. Even though the name stays the same, the hook and the movement sort of somewhat resemblant, but the purpose behind it definitely changed each generation. So now in Chen style, this single word, it no longer have this foot in front, which makes sense if you're trying to catch somebody's leg. Instead, it's this way, okay? Which would indicate that, and also before that, your hand is here. So this definitely is not catching the foot or a kick. So it hint towards something else. Now today I'm not going to talk about Chen style, and again, it's a whole can of worm. Everyone has different interpretation on what the single word is for. But this is to point out that from Qi Zhiguang's general to Chen style, Chen village, single word has already changed its application and the way it is actually done. And when it comes to Yang style, it yet again changed. One of the biggest changes in Yang style is that instead of having the hand left behind there, the hand is actually here, and the full movement, right? It looks like this. So one of the major things that are different is that firstly the hand is now to the side, not behind. The body somewhat faces forward, not sideways. And also the hand is no longer just some kind of sweeping motion. You kind of look like a sweep, and there's also a push. So those are the three key changes from Chen style to Yang style. Now let's look at a few random internet examples of how other people single word application.
This now. I like this. On this broken arm, it will happen. This punch you out.
So this one is pretty much hilarious, right? It's basically when the guy does a punch, and we're watching to catch him here, and then try to throw him off balance. This again, it kind of is a logical way to interpret why the hand is at the back and this hand is here. And it's somewhat, if you do get in here, you can throw the guy off balance. However, there's a lot of problems to this approach if you do tackle it from a practical perspective. Firstly, you have enough time to catch a hand and go under it. It's just impossible, right? Unless the guy punch super slow. If he has like a regular punch, he's gonna pull back before you can dive in. And also, just to catch a hand like that, also very hard. And even if he's just having his guard here, and I try to do this, it's also very hard because he can just yank down here, and I can't really overpower him. He has a much better posture and structure here than what I'm trying to do. So it's very hard to go in, and if he just keep down his elbow long, I'm gonna get stuck. And lastly, if I do end up here, this is not the best way to throw someone, because to do that, I had to come in contact with his elbow, and if he's bending the elbow, he could he could limit my range of motion. Okay, if I do get up in this range, the better to throw someone is actually like this. Almost nothing he can do to stop me from yanking him over here. Right? He can apply more force downwards, but it doesn't matter because I'm just gonna throw him that way. So if I do end up in that situation, this is a bad application. So this one doesn't make sense if you really think of it practically, right? It makes sense if someone has no combat experience and just thinking about the weird posture and then come up with a solution. But definitely, in my opinion, not the real one or the correct one.
Here, I'm going to come back here and step. Okay, strike if you want. Coming across here and then settling.
The next one, this is where we can see the importance of the concept of Occam's razor. It's just simply too complicated and too niche. Well, yeah, it's also too niche, so it doesn't fit the master key requirement either. Basically, I thought, my hands are like here, so you can't grab me, so I kind of do this. Go with me for that. Yeah. So he's here, and he had to yank it here, and so he extends this is the hook, and then he can go in here and then throw him off balance. So of course you can see that I had to ask Eric to go with me, because otherwise, if he's here, it's actually very hard to do that. And even if I do somehow end up doing that, like, I can just keep yanking this. Why do I have to do the rest of the motion? That is not economical. I mean, if I already have somebody in a lock like this, I'll just keep yanking him, and I can hit him in the face, or just keep yanking this. I don't have to do the rest. So this, well, again, it looks like the motion in single work, but if you think about it from a practical perspective with Occam razor and the master key concept, it can't be the correct solution. It's too niche. The only words if you get hold of this guy's wrist, and and in this video, there's a very specific way of getting hold of that guy's wrist. And when you do, there's a much simpler way to end the fight than going into a single word. So again, in my opinion, this cannot be the correct solution. So then what would, in my opinion, be the correct solution? So my understanding of Taichi have basically two roots, right? First is from my Taichi master, Master Zhang Zichen, which comes from the Shiming line of Taichi. But arguably, he's not that into combat, so even though he has knowledge of it, he hasn't really put it into testing. So I don't take everything he say relating to combat completely, right? I do have to consider how viable they are based on my own experience. Another knowledge that I do get is from Master Chong, which is my Wuxing Tongbei master. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know exactly why. But if you're new here, let me briefly explain. So Master Chong, Wuxing Tongbei, right? Our Wuxing Tongbei was founded by great grandmaster Zhang Ce, who spent 10 years in the Yang family studying Yang style Taichi from the second generation Yang family member Yang Banhou and Yang Jianhou. As a result, his Tongbei, his chief family Tongbei, got influenced by the Yang family's internal mechanic, which resulted in great-grandmaster Zhang Ce founding this new lineage of Tongbei called Wuxing Tongbei. So in our Tongbei practice, we really incorporate a lot of the Yang family's body mechanic, right? The 10 principles, 10要 to be specific. But at the same time, he also passed down his version of the Yang family form. And unlike the Yang Chengfu's lineage, which has been argued to be diluted, because Yang Chengfu apparently changed the style to fit the public and to supposedly take out the more combat-oriented training to make it better fit for general public. I'm not saying that's 100% true, but that is a general consensus in the community. But the Wuxing Tongbei's lineage version of Yang style form has not been influenced or mixed with the third generation Yang family people. So we can believe that it still somewhat remains authentic of what Zhang Ce learned from back in the second generation. Obviously, every time something passed down in the human history, things do get altered, people have their personal interpretation, and so some things get copied incorrectly, some things go missing, something get added. So I'm not saying that this is a carbon copy of second generation Yang style form. However, it's more likely to be more close to that second generation Yang family martial arts than what you see today out there, especially when this lineage is not that commercial, right? It's a very somewhat relatively unknown lineage, and therefore there's less incentive to make things up, to sell videos and DVDs and get tons of students. It was all these considerations. Also, I also then cross-check between what I learned from Master Chong versus what I learned from my Taichi master, and to see if something exists in both sides, then they're most likely correct. Again, it's impossible to know exactly what the original technique was intended for, but I'm going to present you with what I believe to be the most viable explanation for this very strange looking move. So firstly, we need to look at how it's done in the form. Because a lot of time when people explain these moves, they don't actually take consideration of what's done in the form. For example, in the previous example where the guy tried to grab a pipe and then yank somebody this way, the hand in the form doesn't go over your head. So naturally, this can't be correct, even if you just strictly go by how the form is done. People have this weird idea that, forms are different to application. But if you really think about it, if you're the founder of a style, you have an application, you want to invent a form, you're going to design the form as close to the intended application as possible. You're not going to, if I'm actually going to intend for this move to work like this, but in the form, I'm going to do it like this. It just makes no sense. So it is very important, in my opinion, to look at how the form's motion is exactly done, and then to determine how that relates to application. And in the Yang form, basically you go from, 提手上式 here, you move around, and it comes back, and then you do this. So here is the first clue, right? So this is a hook. And in my opinion, what is useful? It can be used for two purposes. So you can either intercept a punch, like this, or when he's on guard, I can use this to open up his guard. Obviously, when you're using on a punch, it's somewhat more challenging because you have to be fast, but it's definitely doable if given enough practice. Alternatively, when he's on a guard position or whatever, maybe back then they don't fight a lot like this, but they will have somewhat handwork if they're in like a traditional external style context. So they have some arm here, right? Whether it's like this, like that, or whatever. So whatever I have here, I can basically use this to take it out of the way. So that is what this is most likely used for. Now, this part, why does it have almost like a sweeping motion? But unlike chain style, which the motion goes like this, it actually comes here, comes back, and then goes out. Right, my understanding is basically this. If I do this and get that out of the way, obviously it has another hand. This hand isn't going to be down there. So I had to compete with that. So this sweeping motion basically helped me to remove this out of the way by using a pulling rotational inflation force, and then it comes in with a strike. So this is to open up the second hand, and then this is the strike, right? So putting together is here, there, and that. So that would be the most logical explanation for what single work is used for. Now, of course, unlike external styles, just knowing the application is not enough. You need to have the correct internal and body mechanic, because if you don't have enough torque or the spiral force, then you can't get this arm out of the way. And if you can't unbalance somebody like that, then this one is not going to work. And again, once I'm here, if you can't notch this hand slightly out of the way, you can't open it up. And lastly, even if I'm here, if I don't have the correct compression force that can actually knock air out of his lung, the strike itself is also not going to work. And in case you're wondering why it isn't hitting for the face, if you look in the form, the hand is clearly about here, so it's not up there. So this is definitely not intended for face strike. And also with face strike, right, the displacement force works a lot better. You want to have stuff that throw more kinetic energy, so that causes the face to displace, which can cause concussion. But because it's a body shot, right, which correlate to my previous video on the fast form and why that form particularly I don't think is real. On the body, you don't really want to have kinetic kind of motion. What I want is to just place it here, compress the body, and then do the strike. So like shown in the previous video about the Yang style fast form, instead of coming here and do that, which doesn't actually work against a sufficient weighted person hitting the torso. That's a very bad idea. What I want to do is here, and just yank the power in there. And obviously, with the pads, it's still relatively safe to just do that. And without the pad, right, you can imagine how this would knock air out of your lung, right? Yeah. It's not comfortable. Which then allow me to then carry on with whatever move I intend to do next. So that is the most logical explanation to what this move is used for. However, in my lineage, we also have another variation of this move, where we actually takes out this complicated part of it. We actually just from here, we just go here and do that. So this isn't shared by all other lineages of Yang style Taichi, it's just what we do. But this then also lends itself to another interpretation of this application. So instead, it's basically what we use against a hook. So if he throws a hook this way, I'm just going to intercept it, and the hand here basically helps to prevent him from escaping. If my hand is just like this, he can hit and then bounce back. And then, that's not good. I want to trap it. So that one instead, when you swing the punch, it's like that, right? So that's what this hook is used for. Also, it kind of upsets his balance, as you can see. If I just stop it, not always going to affect his balance, but if he does it, and I do that, that affects his balance. And that's then where I hit with that hand, or like directly to the chest. Obviously, I'm having this happen because in Wushin Tongbei we have a similar technique, but the hand goes horizontal. But if it's a strictly Taichi speaking, then the hand would be here. I had the wrong leg. So it will be here. And so it will be both sides like that. And in this case, we don't really need this motion because both hands happen together. So if he swings at me, chances are he's not really defending too well with that hand. So if I just go both together, there's a higher chance of me just connecting. Whereas if I do the previous one where I hook first, then by the time I come in, he will most likely be ready for my second attack. But if I stop his first attack and attack him at the same time, most likely his hand isn't going to be ready to stop the attack. Which is why, in this case, the hand just kind of goes out. It doesn't need this. So these are the basically two interpretations that I think is most likely what the original single verb application is used for. And if we reference this to my previous video regarding the dueling etiquette, you can also see how it fits into that dueling context culture, right? So when he's throwing a hook at me, I don't really want to step out of the way. Instead, I want to charge into him and to counter his attack to secure that win for myself. Which is why I want to go in and hit him at the same time. And that's also reoccurs in all the internal martial applications, that they want to get into the guy rather than retreating and then retaliate. So instead of dodging it and then coming back, which is what we do in boxing and other modern martial arts, they want to just kind of go in and use structure power and a kind of like a surprise attack that he's not expecting to catch him off balance and off guard and secure the win, which again works better in a modern, which again works better in a real life scenario, right? If a person on the street comes to me, this will be a far easier approach, I think, than having to go back and then try to kick him. I mean, that definitely works, but this will just be a neater solution to that conflict. And other one as well, right? If I'm talking about the hooking approach, again, if we're in a traditional internal martial dueling context, then this will either be a bait. So even if his hand is also down here, this will be like the bait. And if the moment he reacts to it, then you do that. If he doesn't, then you just whack him in the face. So it kind of almost works similar to circular hand in Wushin Tongbei. But obviously the results are very different. In Wushin Tongbei, circular hand goes like this, pointing with punch, whereas this, you kind of do that with the structure this way. So what happens in internal martial arts, all the powers are similar, but the interpretation of how to use the power is different. That's basically what changes from technique to technique. So this, in my opinion, is what single whoop is actually most likely used for, and I hope that this will be making more sense than all the other random single whoop applications you see on the internet. Alright, so hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you do consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. If you can support me on Patreon, that would be greatly appreciated. As always, a shout out to my Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much for your support. Always feel free to contact me, message me whenever for any questions on current content or suggestions for future content. And I do have a whole list of Patreon exclusive videos that goes more in depth about internal martial art. In fact, following this video, I'll be releasing a Patreon-only part 2 on single whoop, where I explain the actual body mechanic in reference to the 4 fundamental forces of internal, on how single whoop actually generates power, both on the hook, interception, as well as the strike itself. So if you do have a keen interest on going into the internal scientific explanation on the mechanic of internal martial arts, then do consider subscribing and joining my Patreon family. As always, thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.